Okay, so we're following the chapters in the book. We're taking you from the beginning of the process when you're maybe thinking about selling your home. Actually, first we're in a pandemic world, and we kind of covered that. That's not in the book. This is so new. I'm working on a new version. Probably in the next version, that'll be part of the book, but this version doesn't mention that. But it's going to walk you through the sequencing. And in the sequencing, we were talking about you might need to get some work done to make your house, maybe get it painted or do some things. So now we're taking you a step further. We're following the book, and we're at the pre-sale inspection. And we believe this is the single most important step in the entire process of the home selling. And the reason is you can get a lot of control. You're going to save yourself a lot of stress, and you're going to save yourself money, okay? Because that's what's really important. And this is from the perspective of the home seller, okay? There's ways to get rid of surprise problems and eliminate back-end negotiations. So here's how the pre-sale inspection works in a nutshell. And again, we do talk about this in the book. So the pre-sale is, instead of the old-fashioned way was, if you go back in time, when maybe you bought a house 10 or 20 years ago, when you bought the home, you would sign an agreement of sale, you would make it contingent upon doing a home inspection, and then you would agree to a price and terms, and then the home inspector would come in and inspect the home. And the home inspector is going to find things wrong with the plumbing, the electric, the roof. You know, you name the issue, we've seen it and dealt with it. So the concept here is before the buyer finds out what's the issues are, we have our seller find. It's a preemptive strike. Before the buyer gets involved in the process, we have the information and we know what things are going to be issues. And it gives the buyer an opportunity it gives the seller an opportunity to correct some of those things. So if the home inspector says that I'm going to pick a very typical example. In a hot water heater, there is a temperature pressure relief valve. It's a piece of pipe that is connected to a hot water heater. And when pressure builds up in a hot water heater, this pipe is supposed to go to the floor or a couple inches from the floor and discharge so someone doesn't get burned. You know, it would scald your face, your eyes, or whatever if it were to discharge. So many houses that get inspected are missing this, call it a $10, $5 part, okay? But the home inspector is going to estimate high. So the concept is we can address this before the buyer gets involved. And the concept of doing the pre-sale home inspection in advance, maybe 6 months, maybe 12 months, is that we find out what the buyer is going to find out is wrong with the house in advance. And it's a security blanket, right? Because it makes them feel better, because we're going to give this to the buyer, and we're going to, with a seller property disclosure statement and the pre-sale home inspection, the buyer will get this before they make an offer on our seller's home. So we are setting the expectation up with the buyer in advance of, here's what we know about the house, here's what things might be wrong, and by the way, you see this last little bullet point? It says contract language. We're going to put a clause in the agreement of sale that says something like this: exclude the defects identified in the pre-sale home inspection report performed by ASHI Home Inspector X on ABC date. So there's language specific. So we're going to give the report. We're not fixing every single thing that's wrong with it, but we're asking the buyer in advance not to renegotiate our price for things we know about already. If they find something new, then it's fair game. You can say something to us. So this is going to be the most difficult part of the presentation today, because it's got a lot of parts and pieces to it. And I'm hoping that it's clear to everyone. Certainly if it's not, Oh, we got a question. I was waiting for questions on this one. So, you want to read it, Samantha?
Sure. It says, do buyers accept a seller's pre-sale inspection, or will they typically have their own done also? That's a really good question.
I love your question, Dean. And the answer is what we find statistically, we've been doing these for the last, let's say, 9 years. 50% of the time, the buyer will absolutely accept our inspection. A couple reasons why that statistic is 50%. Number one, they don't want to pay the money again to do another inspection. Number two, our inspection, it's a very detailed report. It's got lots of data on it, and they feel good. The real point three, is that they theoretically have a buyer agent that's representing that buyer. And although the buyer agent is supposed to be representing the buyer, sometimes they're not, and they might advise their client, why do you need another one when we already have one? And it's another way to close a window. So they might try to discuss that with their client, their buyer client, and try to see if they don't do another one. And the other 50% of the time, Dean, is that the buyer will not trust us, will not trust our inspector, doesn't like us, whatever, and they decide we're getting our own inspection. Okay, great. Knock yourself out. Get another inspection. But don't forget, down here, this contract language, we're going to ask when we negotiate that contract before it gets signed, we're going to say exclude the defects that we know about in our inspection. I hope that answered your question. I know it's a long answer to a short question. So thank you, everyone. Again, don't forget, if you could, to do the feedback, because I'm really looking forward to seeing how we can make these better, because we're going to be launching a whole bunch while we're trapped inside practicing social distancing. So this is something to keep us out of trouble, and we'll probably have a whole bunch more for you.